Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel on investing in China. Hi, I'm Jean-Baptiste Su. I am a principal analyst at Atherton Research here in Silicon Valley and a columnist at Forbes, where I cover the business of technology. And if you wonder, yes, Jean-Baptiste is French, Su is Chinese, so I don't know if you can make a more cross-border than this. And I live in Silicon Valley, so I think it's very apropos. Thank you to both of you for joining me. And we're going to talk about investing in China and what we as investors need to know before we do the jump. And to talk about this, we have Sheng. You're the founding chairman of Denhua Capital, and Andrew Chung with 1995 Capital. 1955, sorry, yes, 1995. That's maybe the next jump. So quickly, introduce yourself, your funds, your investment strategy, and maybe some examples of companies you invested in recently.
Yeah. So should I go first?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my name is Chen Zhan. I have a rather unusual career. I'm both a full-time professor at Stanford University. At the same time, I'm the founding chairman of the Denhua Capital, abbreviated as DHVC. So we started this fund about 3 to 4 years ago with $2 US funds, mainly focused here in Silicon Valley, focused on Stanford faculty and students, but now getting quite broad. But in the cross-border aspect, we are actually one fund that invested as LPs for practically all major frontier technology companies out of China, which includes Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, Sina, Ctrip, Lenovo, JD.com, and so on, but also some of the major US investors. So in our LP composition, we're truly kind of cross-border. And very recently, as of a year ago, we started a 1 billion RMB fund in China. So we're really cross-border in that sense.
So you have two funds, one in China.
3 funds, $2 US funds here, and 1 fund in China. So China is really in an incredible stage, really ready to take off, going from manufacturing to innovation. So they're really interested in kind of learning from how Stanford does it. So in that sense, our fund is playing a pivotal role in that respect. And we're invited by many different regions in China to both look at the deals, but also working with the entrepreneurs all across China. Our general investment area in artificial intelligence, machine learning, AR, VR, big data, networking technology, financial technology. We're very interested in blockchain, but also in biomedical field.
Which stages early?
So initially we started early, but now our fund size, we have a $92 million US fund as the first one, and now closing at $350 million US fund. So we have a quite sizable fund. So we're investing all the way from early to Series C.
What's about the ticket?
Ticket size all the way ranging from 200,000 for seeding investments, but up to about 10 million. Yeah.
Recent investments?
Recent investments, for example, it includes Branch Metrics, which is doing kind of a deep linking technology within mobile. AutoX, which is autonomous driving without LiDAR, without precision map.
Really? Really? That works?
Yeah, it works. So that's, I believe, the only way to scale. We can discuss a little bit later. But also applying AI technology to medical imaging. So that is a company called Path AI. Path stands actually for pathology, by using computer vision to look at pathology slides.
Awesome. Andrew.
Good afternoon. Andrew Chung, founder and managing partner of 1955 Capital. I was previously a venture capitalist with a couple of other firms. Started my career about 12 years ago with Lightspeed Venture Partners. Was there for 5 years and then was a general partner at Khosla Ventures for 5 years. And through the entire time, was very lucky to be able to explore a lot of frontier technology areas like energy, environment, food, agriculture, genomics, new health technology. A lot of the less traditional sectors on Sand Hill Road with two great firms that I was proud to be a part of. One of the things that I started to find during my time at these firms was more and more of these companies were starting to get attention in places like China, Southeast Asia, India, and there were a lot of capital sources in those parts of the world, a lot of government, societal, and corporate demand to access technologies that were in our portfolios. And so I started to hop on planes to go to China and bring many of our portfolio companies there, and in many cases to great effect. So about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, had the idea that this type of cross-border thinking probably warrants a fund strategy in itself. And so I started 1955 Capital to focus on that. So what our firm does is invest in US and European technology companies in the sectors that I mentioned. I call them the Save the World sectors: energy, environment, food, ag, health, and work with the American or European teams to help build bridges to the Far East or other markets where there's a desperate need for what they build. So for many of the portfolio companies that I was lucky to be a part of at Coastline and Lightspeed, many of the companies tended to take a very US-centric mindset. Western management team, Western investors, Western board members. Frequently, I was the only East Asian member of the board. I was on 10 boards when I was at Khosla, and I was, I think, almost in all cases, the only Chinese-speaking board member. And so what I found myself doing was really advising the entrepreneurs on how would you do a licensing deal or a JV deal or raise money in China? How would you leverage some of the government incentives to be able to build a factory in China? And some of these companies were able to turn what was a difficult fundraising environment in the US to the ability to raise, in some cases, hundreds of millions in these frontier markets to build their businesses. And so 1955 is really around doing this systematically. So every one of the companies that we look at with not a US-centric mindset of whether I can attack the market here, but with a global mindset. And in many cases, China or Southeast Asia is a very good starting point for a lot of these technologies. We were one of the largest new debut funds that was announced in 2016. And we've done, talk about a couple of the types of investments that we've done.
So how big is the fund so far?
So we announced a close on $200 million in capital commitments last year. And for the team that was coming together, rolling off of prior commitments, including myself at Khosla, and starting to do investments, building a team, and really living a startup kind of life, which is really exciting. A couple of the representative things that we've done, we invested in a company called Crop Enhancement, which is trying to solve a holy grail problem in agriculture, which is how do you boost crop yields without using much, if any, pesticides. So if any of you are familiar with the space, a lot of farmers always kind of deal with the pressure of having a limited amount of space to grow their crops, and if they can juice the fields with more of the toxins, they can kill the pests, but obviously it's not good for human health or food safety. So we invested in a company out of Cambridge, Massachusetts that is able to apply crop coatings to allow insects to not be able to detect what's underneath the coating. 10 microns thick, invisible, expands, and is safe, but boosts crop yields significantly without the harmful products involved. So US, interesting market. Asia, fantastic market, because in places like Indonesia, in Malaysia, in China, a lot of government pressure on the farming community to be able to improve their food safety and agricultural practices to be successful.
So what's the average size of your investment?
So we have a pretty broad flexibility. On average, we're probably looking at a first check of between 3 to 7 million. We're also looking at potentially a couple of smaller, earlier stage seed investments.
And so that would be for Series A or?
So interestingly, in a lot of the areas that I'm looking at, there are a lot of companies that are actually quite well developed that Silicon Valley investors now are shying away from because they're kind of chasing after the next Snapchat or the next Bitcoin startup. And so we are able to access a lot of Series B or Series C opportunities often for a seed or A price. And so there's an interesting arbitrage there. And then the moment that these companies are able to access a Chinese or Southeast Asian market and get a partner there, our expectation is that there will be a nice value accretion, which will make this a very returns-oriented mindset for investing in these important categories.
Right. So the first question really, it's before we think about investing in China, do we need to speak Chinese?
I do.
Yeah, you do, but
yeah, it certainly helps a great deal. I think.
So if you don't speak Chinese, then you're
Yeah,
probably
I
gonna.
think it is. I wish the culture is more open, but I think in the end of the day, speaking Chinese really helps tremendously.
So who doesn't speak Chinese? All right. Well, you
But
can
for those
leave.
who don't, I think the partnership will be very good. So one thing we're helping is to help a lot of U.S. Companies or portfolio companies to go to China. But I think also in terms of the model, there's very interesting models in the U.S., a B2B SaaS model, and China is really growing very fast in that sector. So we can look at what was successful. I think the best thing is to learn lessons from one country and reflect it on the other. So I think in that space, China will grow explosively. But on the other hand, there are very interesting business models. So far, it has been only one way in terms of business model and innovation going from US to China. But very recently, we're seeing the reverse trend. So for example, in China, the bike sharing is really an innovation out of China. You have mobike, you have OFO, you can park the bike everywhere, and so you can ride the bike so easily for any place to any place. But now we are because we know China so well, we invested in a company here called Lime Bike that does the bike sharing program in the US. So I think understanding both, because one country, both the success or failure is really a great lesson, which is very hard to come by. And if you can understand that well and to apply this to another country, I think, and to having both options like what we do really help tremendously.
So if we we sort of speak Chinese, and so that's the first step.
Yeah.
And but why investing in China? I mean, here, especially coming from Silicon Valley, where we have pretty much, well, we're the center of the world in terms of technology, and because technology is everything today, so we're pretty much the center of the world. So why?
Well, I think in many things it's no longer. For example, in mobile payment, I think China is doing so much more innovation out of China than in the US. I think also WeChat has a lot of innovation the US is learning. So I think
Facebook is learning from WeChat.
I think to know both. Today, I think when I founded this fund, Danhua Capital, we have the vision to build two bridges, both between US and China, and between frontier technology and investment. I think these are important bridges to build, but it takes very special kind of people to do it. Those who can understand frontier technology. I'm a professor of physics at Stanford, but also understanding investment, but speaking Chinese, but also well respected in the US.
So you would invest in those frontier technologies in China?
Yeah, both in China and in the US.
Right.
So but also try to study what worked and what didn't, and try to apply those lessons well.
So, yeah, I think one of the things that, and all of us sitting at the epicenter of venture capital on Sand Hill Road, there's an old adage in venture capital that you want to invest, 10-mile radius outside of Stanford, and that kind of thing. And I think that's one of the things that
it works. I mean, it worked.
Yeah, it worked. It worked in in an important generation in venture capital. I think one of the things that is becoming more apparent is, as Professor Chung mentioned, there are a number of things developing in China at a speed and pace that's different from here, because you have the fastest growing middle class of all time. You have an agrarian society moving to an urban society. You have ubiquitous broadband and internet. You have a lot of technologies that actually have leapfrogged the speed at which this is developed. So what that does is creates a lot of unknowable upside across a range of consumer categories, financial categories, and resource categories. So food and agriculture, again, are two areas that we look at quite a bit, energy and environment. A lot of the things that we might take for granted in the United States, because the food system is very safe. Everyone gets energy to their homes at the right time. Healthcare, you can find a cardiologist or a pulmonologist whenever you want. When you look at a place like China, where you have this fast-growing middle class coupled with an infrastructure that is still newer and being established, you have long lines out the door in the hospitals to get a routine checkup in the cold and in the polluted air. You have a lot of new energy-making infrastructure that was developed in order to power this industrial revolution that's now polluted everything in a much more difficult way than it is here. So what that does is it creates this type of survival-driven demand for a lot of the different sectors that we might take for granted in here that create amazing investment and entrepreneurial opportunities. And I think it's that type of arbitrage that certainly Professor Chung and I spend a lot of time thinking about, and it's something that, again, necessitates investors in Silicon Valley to have more than just a Silicon Valley, Stanford, or with all due respect, Stanford or US-centric mindset, because the globe offers a lot of different types of opportunities out there. Just on the Chinese point, when I was going through this, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, there was an NVCA, National Venture Capital Association report that was published. And I think that the percentages were, I don't remember exactly what it was, but fewer than 10% of the general partner or managing partner level folks out of all of the venture capital firms in the United States were Asian. And so Chinese is obviously a subset of that, and the number of folks that actually speak Chinese is even a smaller subset, right? And so the importance of that cannot be underestimated because of the cultural and language barriers, the levels of etiquette and respect to be able to negotiate a deal in China, whether you're raising capital, negotiating a joint venture, or a licensing deal. If you're an investment firm that is trying to get a junior investment professional to help you do that because they happen to grow up going to Chinese school, or if your portfolio company is getting a quality assurance engineer to help you negotiate a deal because they happen to speak Chinese, that's obviously very suboptimal. So I think Professor Chung is absolutely right that in the way that I think both of us are building our teams, you're looking for people who are very bicultural and have the ability to negotiate on behalf of a portfolio company as the chairman of the company or as a senior executive in the company, and that creates a much higher probability of success to get a win-win deal on both sides.
So now we know the opportunity is huge in China in terms of investing. So now it's great because both of you has a different perspective. You have more of the investor perspective and Andrew, you have more of the company, the startup perspective. So now that we know that the opportunity is huge, how do we do it? As an investor, how do I invest in China? How do different options?
Yeah. So we do it by building 2 funds, a US dollar fund, 2 US dollar funds here with a lot of Chinese LPs, but also building an RMB fund which can invest locally.
RMB?
Yeah, RMB funds, currency, yeah. So, and it's also building the team that has knows both sides. For example, Johnny Zhang, who is leading our RMB China investment, he went to Stanford Graduate School of Business here. So really understand how things are done in the Valley. But the main answer to your question is putting together the right team is most important.
And the fact that
but also having the flexibility because entities in China have two kind of structures. Either what is called a VIE structure, where you can invest into a Chinese company in US dollar, or you can do just pure local company. But recently we see that there's a lot of growth in the pure RMB fund. So that's what we are trying to do.
All right. Any changes? I mean, there was the meeting of the Communist Party last week.
Yeah, so I think this will even propel China even faster on the track towards innovation. If you read the declarations of the Party Congress, the central focus of the next 5 years will be promote science and technology and innovation. This is remarkable that you have a leader of such the most populous country that's putting all their weight behind science, technology, and innovation. And look at what U.S. government is doing.
And so the flow of money between the U.S. and China...
Yeah, it's restricted right now. So that's why we need 2 currency funds.
Right, and it's restricted on both ways.
No, U.S. doesn't restrict anything.
Right, but
China, it's hard for RMB to go out. Right. Yeah. I think both ways in the sense maybe it's also, maybe that's less of a problem of USD going to China, but for RMB to go out. But I predict it will loosen up. Right. There was some panic last year, but now I think things will improve gradually.
Right. Maybe blockchain will, Bitcoin.
But they're banned in China. That's one. So that's one of the, when you think about investing in China, one of the unpredictabilities So the government has so much weight and power that it has to be coped with.
Yeah. So just so you know, no Bitcoin, no ICOs in China.
Yeah.
So Andrew, now, you know, as a startup, as a company, I see China again, great opportunity. The middle class is even the 1%, and 1% of a billion three, it's huge. So how do I access the Chinese market?
Sure. Well, I think there's over time, having, at Coastal we had 200 portfolio companies. I could say that, easily half of them would get pinged by different Chinese companies or Chinese investors on a regular basis, and many of the companies wouldn't know what to do with these conversations. So if you're at a trade show, you're at a conference, and the CTO of a company comes up and says, I'm really interested in your technology, most of the time, the person working in the trade show doesn't know that that was the CTO of a $60 billion market cap based out of China who was flying over to evaluate technologies. And so I think there's probably three pockets of China touchpoint that your typical Silicon Valley company might experience. And with the right type of partners or advisors to help foster those, you can make things happen. So the first is, again, a lot of this inbound interest, right? There are a lot of delegations of Chinese groups coming over to evaluate technologies, look for investments, whether it's corporate or financial. And so many companies actually already have an interesting pipeline of these opportunities, but they either don't exactly know how to respond to it, don't know how to prioritize it, or get dissuaded by their investors and board to do anything about it, right? And so that often leads to inaction or inertia. The second is a set of partners that if you look at your startup's business holistically, there are probably 4, 5, 6 industry leaders in China, either in the industry or in an adjacency, that probably one should start thinking about in terms of doing actual biz dev. So a lot of portfolio companies in the US tend to have a very US-centric business development mindset. Again, if you look at China or East Asia as a broader palette, being more proactive about looking for these types of opportunities is an important part of the toolkit. And then the third thing is figuring out where you can draw on the vast capital resources that are available in China. So whether it's Danhua's RMB fund or the thousands, literally thousands of venture capital and growth equity firms that are in China trying to invest in technology companies and in a hyper-competitive place, how do you access those and prioritize those? So at 1955, we try to be very thoughtful when we invest in a company to know or feel that in all three categories, we're able to assist the CEO or management team in making some of these very difficult decisions and having a team that can establish enough trust to allow a Western management team with a Western investor base and a Western board to open their hearts and minds to a large Chinese private company that may have significant capital to invest to build a first factory there, protect the IP there, or a local investor on that side of the pond to be able to help grow the opportunity there. So for us, that's really the way that we built out our team, to combine people who have been in venture for a long time that can prosecute and understand the technology, understand the market opportunity, understand the Asia market opportunity, as well as having the cross-border operational expertise to be able to help a very seasoned American CEO think about how to tackle the Asia opportunity and land there.
Can you talk about IP? I mean, this is one of the sort of the key topic, and especially when we talk about China and partnering and investing. So, for on the perspective of a startup, what can you say about IP?
Yeah, I think the first thing to be very objective about is that there was a company in our past that we were about to be acquired by an American or a Chinese company, but there was a lot of concern about IP, so we instead took an American offer, and it was actually the American company that violated certain IP-related issues. So it's not that Chinese partner equals risk of IP. I mean, anyone in the globe can steal IP, right? So I think you need to have good judgment all around. But specific to the IP question in China, What we tend to self-select for at 1955 are companies where there is enough of a technology or a foundational differentiation where you can have multiple ways of protecting your IP. So it could be the Coca-Cola syrup method, where there's some secret ingredient like a particular microbe or a particular material that you can manufacture outside in Singapore, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, and then ship into China for component assembly and finishing. It could be that a process is divided up into 4 different pieces, and you can have different team members focused on different pieces so that select few actually understand the entire piece. You can obviously use the patent protection and normal traditional methods for IP protection as part of it. But I think the most important thing out of all of it is finding a partner in China, whether it's a manufacturing partner or a go-to-market partner, that is trustworthy, that has a history and experience in working with Western companies that respect rule of law around IP, and frankly, have a lot more to lose by stealing your IP because they have a lot of other types of things that they're dealing with.
Is that easy? Is that easy to find? I mean, a trustworthy partner.
Increasingly, there are more and more companies that do that. Yeah. So the thing that I think is important for a lot of our investors and entrepreneurs to understand is that there's no 100% solution. You're not going to 100% guard your IP, whether you're dealing with an American partner or a Chinese partner. And the more ways that you can layer on protections just increases the chances of the protection while allowing for access to this incredible market that is a big opportunity.
Yeah. Although here the legal system sort of gives us a sort of protection against this. I mean, if Apple decides to steal emojis, the Japanese company that owns the patent behind emojis can sue Apple and eventually perhaps receive some compensation. But what's sort of the legal framework in China? Is that
I think one of the also great mandate of the current the party's Congress is also to improve the legal system. I think overall, to be fair, one sees more improvement on the legal protection of IP from China. But I think things can also happen the other way around. I think Apple was sued in China because they violated some trademark in China, which you can imagine.
Right, and I think the trademark was just was kind of okay, but it was kind of a curious lawsuit. So here in Silicon Valley, we have some of the BATs, the Baidu, the Alibaba, Tencent, the JD is here. So how do you, I mean, even before going to China, I mean, perhaps, what do you think about meeting with those companies, those Chinese companies here in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, we're far beyond meeting them. They are all LP investors into our funds. So through us, by investing into our funds, they get a broad exposure what Silicon Valley is up to. So for example, our investment in an autonomous driving vehicle without LiDAR, without precision map, got tremendous interest from them. And maybe some of the earliest deployment of this technology will be in China. Yeah.
What about
Andrew? I think that it's a fantastic sign that many Chinese and Asian companies are trying to set up operations, R&D centers here, business development centers. That is fantastic, and I think it is showing again a sign that there needs to be more collaboration on both sides, because there's obviously a lot of demand coming from that side. I think the role that 1955 tries to play, and for us, partnering and working with these groups, like I did at Khosla, which is kind of what started this whole thing, because many of these companies, Khosla Ventures was one of the stops when their chairman or chairwoman came to visit Silicon Valley, and so we developed a lot of those relationships. I think what 1955 Capital is careful in serving is we're an American fund, and the team is generally made up of American nationals that have been at the Silicon Valley firms for a long time, and remembering that a part of the ability to access the best opportunities is the trust factor. I think that's one of the things that we try to work with a lot of the Chinese investment groups to be able to co-invest in these opportunities where we're a bit of a familiar face to a lot of the the high technology companies that we've been tracking over time.
I know we have just a few seconds. We are actually running out of time. So when we talk about China, we assume mainland China. But what about Hong Kong, Macau? You know, if you want as a way to get into the Chinese market?
I think in terms of innovation coming, I think it's mostly out of mainland China. We don't see that much out of China and Macau. But Hong Kong is a very interesting place. A lot of investors like to live in Hong Kong and going back and forth to China.
Yeah, I think for us, Greater China, the way we look at Hong Kong, Taiwan, or even Macau for that matter, is in some cases an American company really just doesn't feel comfortable setting up all their operations in an industrial park in China. And so to the extent that there's some ability to have like a Hong Kong subsidiary or a Hong Kong structure or an R&D COE in Taiwan or in one of the other countries, for some American companies that helps bridge that gap while not losing the ability to access that market. But for us also, we also are looking at partnerships in Greater Asia as well. So China, absolutely important story and a huge part of the momentum, but Indonesia is the 4th most populous country on the planet, which I think a lot of Americans don't know. And they have all kinds of infrastructure challenges. They have yet another burgeoning kind of middle class growth there. And so it's not just about China. There is an Asia opportunity and other pockets of the world too. So.
Great, thanks so much, Professor Zhang, Andrew, JB, great job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.